Every time I think about Walksnail, I think of a movie. And it's probably not the movie you're thinking. It's not like French. I'm not talking Escargot here. I'm talking about the movie Turbo. And if you don't know what Turbo is, it's an old movie. It's like 10 years old now. And yeah, I'm old. So to me, it's still fresh in the moist brain that I have. Anyway, it's a cartoon about snails that go fast and race, and they have badass shells and all that stuff. Anyway, I think about Walksnail. I think about that. I don't know why that is, but today's things made me think about that because it is the Walksnail Avatar Pro kit and the Walksnail V2 kit. Hey everybody, I'm Bacon Ninja, and before we get started, I have to say Walksnail did send me both of these for free, for review, to mess with and play around with. Thanks Walksnail. I haven't been paid for this opinion. There's been no compensation. I just get to play with cool toys. That's how I like it. I don't like to be paid for this stuff. It's all supported by my Patreons and my channel subscribers and, you know, those things. Anyway, Walksnail sent them to me. So the opinion is my own. Remember that, because last time I made a video about Walksnail, I really pissed a lot of people off somehow. I don't know. I gave a valid opinion that I thought was valid. It was my opinion. I'm a human being. My experience led me to said opinion, but a bunch of people got pissed off at me. It happens. It happens sometimes, but a lot of people also agreed with me, so maybe you'll agree with me with this one. I don't know. But what are these things that I have in my hand? Well, they are an upgrade and update to the Walksnail Avatar system. And if you don't know what the Walksnail Avatar system is, you've probably stumbled into a video that you are not prepared to watch because you don't know what the system is. But let me just get you up to speed real quick. It's an HD video system that enables 1080p 60 FPS at its highest modes, or 720p 100 FPS, 720p 60 FPS at its more medium modes. It really resembles the DJI system in that it has kind of the same mechanics, the same form and function of the DJI system, except for it's made by the lovely Caddx, which has been in the FPV market for a really long time. And I do have to say that Caddx has been really great at listening to pilot feedback. And a lot of that pilot feedback went into these things because this is the next iteration of the system that has been out since around summertime last year in 2022. That's how long it's been out, and we're already getting a V2 of the system. And there's a lot of changes in the V2 system, including 2 brand new cameras. The 2 cameras that we have are the V2 camera, which is basically the standard camera, and the Pro camera, which is a Starlight camera with the Starvis Sony sensor, which is sensitive down to 0.000100001, I missed a 0 there, lux, which means that you get a lot of low light performance out of this camera. So think back to the DJI system and something like the Polar Cam. The problem with the Polar Cam, though, is that it was not capable of doing anything except for, you know, low, high bit rate things. This is a little more flexible. And they do say that this cam, the Starlight new Pro Cam, is going to be able to use high frame rate at some point. It's not enabled yet. They did drop firmware for these things just as they released them, but it's not enabled in that firmware. I imagine someone out there is testing 1080p 100 FPS with a Starlight camera. And that person is probably really loving it because it's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome thing that you can do there. Anyway, let's get into more about what these are and why they are different than the V1 and why you might be interested, if you're running the Walksnail system, in going this route instead of your V1 hardware. And starting with the V2 VTX, they have redesigned the outer shell to be a little bit more protective and modern. I think it looks really good. They have added some molded in M2 20 by 20 millimeter mounting points instead of the normal 25 by 25 mounting points on the top and the bottom for your convenience. And yeah, it's kind of a redesign of the VTX. But the thing about this VTX is that they changed some stuff that the pilots really had feedback about. On this VTX, you can see that we have solder pads as well as the plug, so that if the plug rips off or you do something crazy, you can still solder to it. Your VTX isn't toast. And in fact, I really like to just solder to the pads and skip the connector altogether. Now, I had these things in and out of quads 5 or 6 times. I never stripped any of the screw heads because those holes are threaded for the 20 by 20, and that is what I used. I never stripped any of them. I will say, though, that the M2 screws only go in maybe 4 or 5 turns. If you're not a person that's comfortable with that, you might think about the 25 by 25 mounting. That is still through hole. And the 25 by 25 mounting also shares with the caps for the MIPI cable and the UFL. So if you're going to do 25 by 25, just make sure that you put those back on and tighten it down with whatever you're going to tighten it down with. They are both on the same side, so that makes it really easy. One's not on the bottom while the other's on the top. It's pretty nice. That is just a consideration, but don't be scared to use the 20 by 20. I never had any problems with it. I did crash it several times, never had any problems with it. I really like the new redesigned shell. And they made it pretty easy to look on the side and see the pinout of the connector and the pads. They wrote it right there on the side. It's pretty darn nice. They also inset the binding switch and all of those things that are nice and touchy and, you know, break off or whatever in a crash. They set those a little bit farther into the case, so you will need a tool to touch them, but they should be a little bit more protected this time. The VTX does go from 2 to 6S voltage, so it can take that in natively. You don't need a BEC or anything to run it. If you want to run it on VBAT, or if you have an onboard BEC, it's more than capable. I did run this right off of VBAT and had no problems. However, if you have a BEC, I'd recommend something like a 10 volt 2 amp, just to be safe. If you have a 9 volt BEC, 2.5 amp would probably be better. I haven't done amp draw tests. I suspect that Mads Tech will do that, because Mad Tech is a really cool guy, and he likes to get a lot of stuff out on the bench, and he has more scientific equipment than I do when it comes to that. But I will say that, yeah, you probably can run it with a BEC, but you also can run it on VBAT. And I didn't experience any problems, even in crashes. Although my experience is limited as a reviewer. Don't take that as like the word that you can just go crashing the thing on 6S and never have a problem. I still recommend you run a cap. It is a digital system. Caps are necessary, especially on 6S. So just food for thought there. If you run it on 4S, you're a little more safe. On 6S, a cap is probably good. And if you're running 6S, I'd consider using a BEC instead of running it on 6S voltage. But it will go down to 2S just fine. Just there, you probably do want to run on VBAT. As far as the performance of the new VTX, though, it is essentially the same as the old VTX performance-wise. But you'll notice one big thing in the box here. Well, it's actually the lack of one big thing in the box, and that's a second antenna, because they have consolidated down to a single antenna design on this VTX, which I actually really, really appreciate. Having two antennas on something in a print that has, you know, double bulb antennas sticking out the back, it's okay. I mean, we did it on the old school DJI Air Unit, but it's better to use the one. The one works just fine. And if you really, really, really want to know how well it performs in comparison to the V1 system, I recommend you go watch Joshua Bardwell's most recent video on it. I will link it in the description below. After you get done watching this one, of course, because I don't know, you don't have to. My face looks stupid. If you want to drop out now, you can totally do that. It's up to you. It is the internet. You have that kind of freedom. But one antenna really does make it an easier install. It's a lot simpler, and it comes with that in the box. And the antenna held up really well. I used the stock antennas for all of my footage, testing, crashing, all the things that I did with it. Never had one crack, bend, break, any of those things. It worked really, really well. And the UFL was really well captured with the little UFL cover plate. Never had one try to come off on me. And in my installations, I did pop it off and on several times and never had a problem with the connector trying to come off the board. It seems really well built. It really does. And the case helps for that. I think the V2 VTX feels a lot more like a polished product. It looks like it's a better pilot-focused product. Thumbs up, Walksnail. I really like it. Whether it performs better or not than the V1 VTX, it at least feels like it is going to last longer than the V1 VTX would in a quad. It doesn't feel as bare. It doesn't feel as small and minimal. It's the same size, but you know. And speaking of size, it is a 30 by 30 millimeter square. So just keep that in mind when you're installing it. Even though it has 20 by 20 and 25 by 25 millimeter mounting, it is a 30 by 30 millimeter square. And it's a fairly chunky boy too. But anyway, that's enough about the VTX. Let's move on to the cameras, because that's where the real meat and potatoes are of these new systems. And the first camera we're going to talk about is the V2 camera. Now this is more similar to the V1 camera in that it's kind of the standard camera on the V2 system now, but it looks a little bit different. I like the look of it a lot better than the V1 camera. It looks more rugged, even though I am sure the glass is the same on the front. The sensor inside is a little bit different. according to the spec sheets, it's a 2K sensor. Now, that doesn't mean that there are 2K of effective pixels on this thing. It is still capable of all the standard modes we're used to. So 1080p, 720p at the frame rates we're used to. And the onboard recording is not going to be in 2K either. It is in the normal mode recording that you're used to with the other Walksnail cameras. So really the upgrade here is more in the design, the ruggedness, and the size. It's 19 by 19 exactly, which is pretty nice. It slims it down a little bit by 1 millimeter anyway, but it retains the DJI 2-hole mounting. So, you know, it might be a little difficult to mount in things that expect a 19 by 19 with a standard middle hole, but you'll probably figure it out. I did just fine. I just picked one of the holes and decided which way I wanted it to lean. Just pick a hole, any hole. Any hole will do, just use it. And hopefully your frame will support it. And if you do happen to have something that takes a 20 millimeter camera and you need some spacers, there are some things included in the box, some little bitty washers that you can probably get to work as spacers for that little bit of a gap you might have. It'll be totally fine. Just expect that when you're installing it. And it is 22 millimeters long, making it a fairly short camera, so it's not just going to stick its nose out there and get pummeled by a bunch of things. It's pretty good at tucking itself in. But when it tucks in like that, you expect you might see some standoffs or props or other things in frame. Now, I never had a problem with that. At about a 30-degree angle, and most of the flying that I did, it really wasn't that big of a deal. But I will say, at 160 degrees FOV, it is fairly wide. These are 160-degree cameras. In fact, both of them are 160 degrees FOV. So just think about that when you're mounting it. You may want to pull it out of the frame a little bit, into the frame a little bit for protection. Just make your decisions. But it is a very, very good camera. And one really cool thing that is in these cameras, the both of them, well, only one of mine, but potentially if you buy them, is a gyro, because they have added gyros inside the cameras so that you can use Gyroflow. And if you get a camera with a gyro in it, it will write the Gyroflow data right onto the internal storage of the VTX where your internally captured video is as well. And taking it into Gyroflow is very easy. And I actually did that. I'll show you in a little bit after we get through the other camera specs, how I did that and what it looked like and if it's any good. And no, I did not find that I needed to soft mount it at all, but I did adjust my Gyroflow settings just a little bit to make sure that it came out a little bit more clean. But anyway, that's enough about that camera. The other one is the really, really special camera. The really, really special thing. Because it's really good. It's very good. It's very chef's kiss. I've never done that before. That's the first time I've ever used that. I don't know if I like it. I don't know. Leave me a comment below if that's stupid or not. And this is it. This is the beast right here. This is the Pro camera. This is the low light camera using a Sony Starvis sensor. It is still a 19 by 19. It's just a hair longer, 24 millimeters long. So this might stick out the front of your quad a little bit, and it does have a lot of glass out there because being a low light sensor, it uses a much bigger lens to gather as much light as possible. Because when you go outside, it looks like this at night. Here on the left, we have the regular V2 camera, the non-low light camera, and on the right, we have the low light camera. And you can see, even though it is grainy, there is plenty of detail at night for nighttime flying. And even though nighttime flying is not technically legal in the United States, if you go an hour before or after dusk, then it's legal. So keep your times there. But it has plenty, especially for dusk. You're never going to run into a problem not having enough light at dusk. Even with the minimal amounts of lighting on my street, it looks like it's lit up completely. You can see on the camera on the left that it looks pretty dark out. You can see a little bit in the sky, but there's not a lot going on. You see some lights every now and then from my neighbors' houses. But the right camera, the Pro camera, picks up a lot. It makes use of all the potential light. It is very, very good at night, even though it does get really grainy because it's cranking up the ISO. There's a whole lot of gain going on, but it is capable of doing it. It's plenty to fly with. You probably don't want to use that footage to post like an edit because it is super grainy, but yeah. And continuing on about the camera itself, it's still 160 degrees FOV. It's a little bit heavier in that this one is about 9 grams where the other one is 7 grams. This one does have a gyro on board, and as far as I can tell, there's no option to buy this camera with no gyro. So if you didn't want a gyro in this, you can't just buy it without one. The V2 camera does have the ability to be purchased without a gyro if you don't need it for some reason, but this one does have a gyro. And they both come with 140 millimeter MIPI cables. They both use the same mounting holes, and everything is really, really good. Now, I'll say the only thing that got me on this one, the V2 camera felt a little bit more rugged. It really did. It felt a little more rugged. The material of the housing was a little bit better. The way the MIPI cable entered was a little bit better from the center instead of the top. And the backplate is plastic on both of them, but the backplate on this one just felt a little bit cheaper. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure on that one. But I'm sure it will hold up just fine because you're probably not smacking the back of your camera. If you're smacking the back of your camera, you are doing something wrong. Just, whatever it is, I'll be interested to see what the video is where you smack the back of your camera because there's something going on that I just can't comprehend. But that's really it. The housing seems fine on the Pro camera, but I will say the quality seems better. The feel seems better on the V2 camera. But the image quality on the Pro camera is really what it's about. And I think that at night especially, it is very, very good. But I did fly both of these things in the daytime as well. And I did a lot of other testing. I stabilized in the day and I stabilized in the night because I did not fly at night because it is illegal to fly at night. I flew 1 hour or I don't know, it was probably 45 minutes after dusk. That is when I took the flights that you'll see later in the footage. The rest of it I held in my hand for the reasons that I just stated, because the FAA, please don't send me letters, the FAA. I don't want any letters from you. And this is what they looked like side by side during the day. Now, during my testing, I really didn't have a lot of days that were super bright sunny days, but this is what it looked like with the light that I had. And you can tell that the Pro camera really does get more light even during the day, during the overcast portions of the day, like what I was dealing with. It really does get more light in the image, which I think is, again, really good because I have flown a lot of overcast days where I wish I could see things better. Yeah, anyway, it still does its job during the day, regardless of what the sun looks like. But you can tell between the two cameras, there's a little bit of difference in color as well. I'd say that the Pro camera is a little bit more sharp and has maybe a little more contrast or a little bit more color saturation than the V2 camera. The V2 camera looks a little bit more washed out. If I had to pick a picture to fly by, though, I think the Pro camera is maybe a little bit too saturated. Of course, there may be a possibility of changing some of those settings. I ran all of this on default. I didn't have a lot of time to dig into those settings. But I would say the V2 camera is more of my style of pilot camera when it comes to the way the footage looks than the Pro, but the Pro did a really, really good job. Nonetheless, it's very, very good during the day. The V2 is also very, very good during the day. The Pro is a bit sharper. The V2 is a little bit softer, and I think there's just a little difference in color saturation or contrast between the two things. Now, before we dive off into what I think is the next really exciting upgrade to the V2 system, which is stabilization, we'll get there in a second. I know that the low light is super exciting, but the stabilization is also really, really cool. I just want to cover some differences too about what comes with these things and how you can order them. So I had two kits. This is the base kit, which means it is the V2 camera and an 8 gig internal storage V2 VTX with no gyro. This is the base kit that you can purchase. And this comes in at $139. Now, if you buy this a different way with the gyro, you also get a VTX with 32 gigs of internal storage. So you get 4 times the storage for $10 more plus the gyro, so $149. This kit is $159. It's the Pro camera with gyro and the 32 gig VTX. Now, if you don't buy them as a kit and you want to buy individual pieces, you can buy the V2 VTX with 8 or 32 gigs, and you can buy the V2 cameras with or without a gyro, mix and match at your pleasure. The Pro camera will have a gyro though, because they just expect if you're going all out, by golly, you're going to go all out. It's, whatever, spend all the money. It's all those things. But something else important changed in the box as well, and it would be the way you connect it to your computer, because traditionally we've had these cables that you plug into the VTX, and on the other end is a USB cable that you plug into your computer, and they're about that long, and it's really, really hard to plug it in. And in fact, in the video where everybody got pissed off at me that I keep referencing, I said that I didn't like that because I didn't like that. Every time I plug in a pack, the thing would fall out. They're not clipped in any way, and I had to move the quad around. And it was kind of difficult. Well, they've remediated this. Remediated, that's a weird word to choose there, but that's the one I said. And I'll say in other reviews, people didn't get it in their boxes, but I think that these are the actual production versions, because I got mine later than everybody else, which is why it's a week later than everybody else's. I actually got the new method for connecting, which means that it came with this little pigtail, which is not very long, but on the end of the pigtail, you put this USB-C adapter. And then you can plug your own USB-C cable in, and however long you want that to be is however long you get to your computer. So now you can have the room to fiddle with your quad and plug a pack in and not worry about it, and it doesn't fall out. And if you really, really want to, if you're putting this thing in a wing or a ducted whoop, you can install that USB-C little board. It has 2 holes for mounting anywhere you want, anywhere you can fit it, and that is easy access to just plug in and go. So thumbs up. I think that is a really good thing that you did there, Walksnail. I like that better than the original cable. I would like to see it be all one connected piece that I didn't have to connect in 2 places, but this is a much better thing. And since the port is inset on the V2 VTXs for where you plug in the USB, that was a really hard series of words to say and pronunciate. Anyway, since it's inset, it's a little hard to get in there, but it slides in nice, and it tends to not fall out as badly as it did on my first initial stuff with Walksnail, again, where everybody got pissed off at me. And on this same train, you may be thinking, well, I've got myself a V1 VTX. These cameras seem cool. Maybe I want a gyro in it. Maybe I want to mix it and I want to match it. You can, actually. You can put the new cameras on the V1 VTX, and it will write the gyro data just fine. The V2 camera is $59, while the Pro camera is $69, and you can put it on your older VTX, and it will work as desired. You just have to update your firmware to the newest version, which I don't remember what the number is, but it's the newest one that's out on the website, so there you go. You can load that up, and it will work. And you can also put these on your Whoop lights. That's awesome, too. And, well, maybe you want to buy a new VTX, but you don't want to buy a new camera. That'll work as well. Everything seems to be plug and play, mix and match. So you can just have it at your heart's content. Things will work as they are expected to work, and you will get all the features out. Now, the thing I don't know is on the Pro camera, whenever they do enable 100 FPS mode in 1080p, which they say is coming, I think that they have some strides to make in 1080p 60 before they can get there, but I'm sure, like I said, they're working on it. Someone's having a whole lot of fun with it. You probably won't be able to do that on the V1 VTX. I'm just going to call it now. That is probably not going to be a thing that happens, but we'll see. We'll hold out hope for it. Just plan on, if you really want that in the future, you might consider just updating the VTX in case. Next time you buy a kit, maybe just buy the V2. I'm sure the V1 price will go down and things will compensate, and it may look really appealing, but I don't know that that's going to be there whenever that actually comes out eventually, however, I don't know when it comes out. Maybe not. So think about that in the future. But now that I've spieled all of this, let's get down to the thing that I was talking about before, which is stabilization. Because I did get my Pro Cam with a gyro because it's the Pro Cam and that's how you get it. So I decided I had to stabilize some things because it's a whole lot of fun to stabilize things. So my kids wanted to go to the park, and I took a little 3-inch quad with this in it. I took a 4S 3-inch quad with a full-size Walksnail VTX and camera in it to go fly in the park. And that thing is a little bit shaky. So I thought, man, that's going to be a good opportunity to use Gyroflow. And in fact, it was. Here you go. This is the footage side by side. On the left, we have no stabilization at all. On the right, we have stabilization in Gyroflow. And you can see that it took care of all of the bobbles that I had. It even took care of the flips and rolls pretty well without making them look totally unnatural. It did a pretty good job. And that's without any additional soft mounting. If you know about the O3 system, the DJI O3 system, you know that they recommend that you soft mount the camera. You need to soft mount it or else your gyro data is going to be wonky and you're going to get weird twitches and a whole lot of other stuff. And then you also have to do some considerations for the PWM frequency. There's a whole slew of things if you want nice stabilized footage out of Rocksteady or Gyroflow in post in your DJI O3 footage. I did not find that to be the case with this Pro camera. I threw it in a hard TPU mount that was just attached to the standoffs, had very, very little give. It's a very chunky mount. It didn't have any give or tolerance at all, and I slammed the camera all the way down on the bottom of it to get the angle I was looking for, so it was basically locked in place the entire time, and the gyro data was usable. Now here's a screenshot of my Gyroflow settings as I was stabilizing the night footage. And you can see that I do have a little bit more filtering on the gyro. I have a gyro low pass on, but I haven't turned on a whole crap load of stabilization. I've kept it pretty minimal, and that's all I needed, and it did a very good job. Minimal zooming, minimal stabilization. It had some issues with sync. If you know about Gyroflow, it has sync points, It had some issues finding sync points, but I didn't have to go manually do anything with them. I basically just set my lens profile, loaded the footage, put a 20 hertz low pass on it, didn't jack with anything else, and used the stabilization settings that I have on the right side, and I exported it. And that is what we got out of it. And I'd say that is totally usable footage. And that was out of the Starlight camera during the day. It's very good. The Pro camera during the day is very good. If I had to pick one camera to run, it would be this one, as long as I wasn't worried about smashing the glass in because its nose is sticking out all the time out of all the mounts. But yeah, it would be that one. That one's a very good camera. And it stabilizes well. And you may be thinking, well, it's 1080p or 720p. Why the crap would I want to stabilize that? Someone out there is running a thumb, like an original thumb on top of their quad, and probably analog, and they're thinking, by golly, I'd love to go to Walksnail, but I like this thumb footage for sharing to my family because my family thinks I'm an awesome drone pilot. And yeah, I can stabilize that. Well, you can do it in camera now. And with 32 gigs of storage, you can do a lot of flights. Most of my flights were about 2.5 to 3 minutes, and it's about a gig a minute is what I could find at 1080p 60, about a gig a minute of my internal storage. So 32 minutes in the air, unless you have some crazy long range thing, is pretty good. And another consideration there, if the 8 gig hasn't been cut it for you because you do have a long range quad, then maybe the 32 gig is the way to go. But the stabilization worked really well. And I also tried it at 45 minutes after dusk. It was roughly 45 minutes after dusk. Where I showed you earlier when I did the whole side-by-side, I went out and flew a quad in it because to my eyes, it was a little bit brighter than it was in the V2 cam, and it looked okay, and it really was before the hour cutoff after dusk, so it was totally legal to fly, so I did fly it. And it did pretty well. It did pretty well indeed. But I will say that Scraggle at night with this camera is hard, the Pro Cam, because of the grainy noisiness of the ISO boost. The Scraggle blended right in, and I whacked a branch, and I crashed. I crashed the quad, but that's fine. It's totally fine. It was more than I expected out of a night flight because I have tried to fly other things at similar times in analog and other cameras that aren't necessarily Starlight sensitive. And yeah, it didn't go well. This went much better than those flights. And because I was able to get a flight, I took another flight and I stabilized it. And this is what that looked like. Because I thought, is it going to be harder to stabilize with all the graininess of the footage? Is Gyroflow going to pick up on that and make it more difficult to stabilize than it would need to be? It actually did a really good job of stabilizing, even at night. The gyro data was good, and I ran the exact same presets. That screenshot that I showed you earlier is what I stabilized my night footage with that I did my daytime footage. So you can totally stabilize your night footage if you want to for some reason. If you don't care about the graininess and you want to just share it because it's totally cool, go for it. It will work. You can totally Gyroflow stabilize your night footage. It works really well. So now that I've covered all of these things, what do I think about it? What do I think about the V2 system? Would I buy this? Yeah, I totally would buy this. I totally would. Now, I flew a lot of mine on the VRX because I'm still testing with the goggles. I use the VRX for a lot of this. And I will say that I still had what I'm going to call, and hopefully we can create a moniker for, because someone on my comments from the last video, again, where people hated me, said it was called the melt zone. They called it the melt zone, and I think the melt zone is a great way to put it. I experienced the melt zone, and it wasn't because of bad antennas. I have really nice true RCs on there. It wasn't because of anything else like that. I was running at 1,000 milliwatts on this thing, and I was on the max output power. I have unlocked all of that. And I still got some smear low to the ground. I did some low, fast passes just to see what it would do. And in a couple spots, it really did smear up pretty bad on me. It didn't do it as bad as it did before. So I'll say that Walksnail has come a long way in this firmware, and I am pleased with it. It is usable now. It is flyable now for me without the smear zone just being all the time. Because I have tried the V1 and the cameras and the goggles, and I had the same experience that I had in the VRX with the Micro 1S board. The smear zone still exists, but the firmware has made it better. And yeah, I think it's totally usable now. It reminds me a lot of DJI V2, even when it smears, because DJI V2 does do that. I mean, it's not perfect. It does the exact same thing when the signal gets lower and it's trying to compress. It will smear things. It just does it a little differently in the Walksnail system because contrary to, what our initial thoughts were, this is new firmware. They wrote this. The chipsets might be similar, very similar. We don't know how similar they are. We know the capabilities are very similar, but they did write all the new firmware, and they're trying to do the compression stuff, and I think it's going to get nothing but better, and it's a good time to buy in, especially with these things. This is some really good quality stuff. I don't see you busting the crap out of these things like everybody had a problem with on the V1 boards. A ton of people broke theirs in crashes. They'd pop, they'd get ruined, they'd rip the connector off. It's useless. You got extra solder pads. It's a little bit more rugged. It's got really nice retainers for the MIPI and the UFL. I think it's very good. I think it's very, very good. Good job, Walksnail. You have made me walk my snail yet again. And maybe this time nobody will get super pissed off. But if you aren't pissed off, maybe you want to be a patron. Is that alliteration? Pissed off and patron. Anyway, I have a Patreon where I fund these things. Of course, I didn't have to fund this because Walksnail sent this to me. But I fund a lot of the things. Most of the things I do on this channel is funded by my patrons and my channel members and my Buy Me a Coffee donations. So 100% of that goes right back into this. And I can tell you it takes way more than 100% of it to do any of it. So yeah. If you feel like it, feel like it. If you don't, that's fine. I'll keep doing this, and my ugly face will probably keep popping up in your For You or wherever the thing is. The algorithm will shove my face in your face because that's what it's good at. Computers just, they do that thing. Anyway, that's all I've got. It's really good. It's really, really good. I was pleasantly surprised. I think they're on a good path. I'm excited to see the future of Walksnail. The goggle prices are coming down for the Dominator HDs. Oh, it's looking good. The Walksnail goggles are winning out. If you have a pair of black goggles, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, until next time, stay greasy. I'll catch you later. The more I think about it, the more the movie Turbo seems like maybe a nightmare. Maybe Turbo was racing because there were chefs after him trying to turn him into escargot. And if you've ever eaten escargot, definitely tell me about it. I want to know. I can't even understand how you could eat it, but everybody says it's amazing. I don't know. Is it a delicacy or is it disgusting? You tell me. My palate is German Polish because that's my heritage. So maybe my palate doesn't understand it, but I really think Turbo was running for his life. And if you don't think Turbo was running for his life, you should try watching the movie again with the perception that Turbo is running for his life and see if it plays out. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. I don't know. Maybe he was running from being a steamed, curly, slimy dinner. Maybe. I don't know.